Hi, this is Brian Peyton Joyner, and today I'm going to teach you how to deep fry. Of course, you've been wondering about this for a while, I'm sure, being from the South, something that we were taught at a very young age before it was really even safe for us to handle oil that was at 350 degrees. And that's going to be something that is very essential about deep frying, is you're going to want to have a thermometer. Very, very critical. One of the worst things that you'll ever have is when someone doesn't properly fry something where the oil's too low. That's how you end up with soggy, just kind of disgusting vegetables or whatever that's been deep fried. You have to have the oil at the right temperature. So I'm going to use my thermometer for that. I'm going to take the oil. Now this is oil that I've used a couple times, probably 3 or 4 times that I fried in. I'm just going to put it in my pan. And then if I need to top this up with some fresh oil, I can do that. And I'm going to reserve this because I probably will be able to reuse that oil and have that again. So I'm going to top it up with a little bit of fresh oil because I want it to be about right here in the pan. So I'm going to top it up with a little bit of just this fresh vegetable oil. It's very important, you want to use for deep frying, you want to use just a plain vegetable oil because you don't want the oil to impart sort of any flavors to the food. So like for instance, you wouldn't want to use corn oil. You could use peanut oil, canola oil. This is just a mixed vegetable oil. What I'm going to be frying today, and I'm going to be making my famous fried squash salad. One of the things that you want to do is start with ingredients that are dry. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wash this. One of the tricks and one of the things that you'll learn is that dry sticks to wet, wet sticks to dry. So I'm going to start with something that's dry, which is this yellow squash here. And I'm going to cut it about this thick. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this squash, and that's about probably 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So once I have these pieces, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just lay them all out here on my cutting board, and I'm going to make sure that they're all about the consistent width. Checking my oil. My oil is, what's going on with my thermometer here? Okay, my oil is not even registering yet, so I'm going to turn up my heat on my stove because it's not even registering at 100 yet. So I'm going to do a breaded squash today. When you do a breading, what you want to do is you want to soak it in a liquid, and then you want to put it in the dried flour mixture. Now that's different from if I were doing a batter where I would mix together the water and the flour and I would have a sort of a batter, like a pancake batter type or like a tempura batter, and that's a different type of frying, but that's not what we're going to do today. I'm going to use buttermilk. Buttermilk used to be basically what the liquid was from the process of making butter. That's no longer the case, and so you'll see this is a cultured buttermilk, and what they do is they add lactic acid to plain milk. What that does is it acidifies the plain milk. It makes it much more viscous. And that's very important because you're going to get a much better coating on the squash by using buttermilk than if you were to use plain milk. I'm also going to then dredge that. This is just all-purpose flour. And so I'm going to just put my flour in here. Now if you remember, one of my rules about cooking is you want to make sure that you add your seasoning where it's needed. And flour being white, it's going to be very bland. And so I'm going to use this Lowry seasoning salt. So this has salt, garlic, onion powder. If you're allergic to MSG, I recommend you get the Lowry's because it doesn't have MSG in it, and it's a classic. So you're going to get in there and you're going to just have that where it's going to be nice, and you can just put a good amount in there. I want that to kind of be almost orangey a little bit. I'm going to want to see that seasoning salt and make sure that I get that nice and seasoned. So while my oil is heating, I'm going to tell you about the salad that we're going to make today. I very much enjoy using arugula. Arugula is something that's very easy to use. You don't have to wash it, it comes pre-washed. The hardest thing about arugula, always for me, is opening the bag. I don't know like what the bag is that they put this arugula in. I'm gonna use one of my favorite ingredients, and that's this Marie's brand. You can get this almost at any grocery store. It's a creamy chipotle ranch. If you fry anything, this is something that's a fantastic dip. We're also going to use some Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese is sort of this rich, luscious mouthfeel. And so I like to add Parmesan cheese in a lot of dishes. So we're gonna get sort of the bitterness from the greens, the umami flavor from the Parmesan cheese. The dressing has a creamy quality. It has a little bit of tartness, so a little sourness. And then we're also gonna add some balsamic vinegar, balsamic glaze specifically, and that adds sweetness and great acidity. So this dish is gonna have everything. And also, you know, from this Lowry seasoning salt, we get our salty. Our oil is about 300 degrees, and one of the things we're gonna make sure that we do is that the oil gets well above the temperature at which we wanna deep fry. We're gonna deep fry this at 375. Now, you're going to have to recognize that when we throw this in the cold buttermilk and then we put it in the flour and we throw a few things in there, the temperature of the oil is going to drop. You have to account for that when you're heating your oil. You don't want your oil just to get right to the temperature that it says on your thermometer for deep frying. So I always like to let it get to maybe, as I look at this on the centigrade, 200 degrees Celsius is about 10 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit above what I want to do when I deep fry. So when I throw a few items in at a time, I'm not going to drop my temperature too much. And that's something else that's very critical when you're deep frying. You want to do it in small batches. And that's the one thing that you want, is you want your stuff to drop into the oil. You want it to get that crisp exterior, and that keeps the oil from getting inside the food, and it actually makes it healthier because you don't get as much fat from the frying in your food. I see my oil is now just above the deep fry temperature, and I'm gonna let it go ahead and continue to heat up. And I'm gonna take the squash and I'm just going to dip it into my buttermilk, and I'm gonna put that in the flour. Now, one thing you'll see I accidentally did there was I dropped a little bit of the buttermilk into the oil. The same way, and you never want to fry things that are wet. That is extremely dangerous, because what happens, and I'm sure we've all seen that, is you get that water in the oil. It causes sort of a mini explosion. The water boils off, but it also brings some of that oil with it. So you're gonna wanna make sure that the ingredients that you put in there are dry. And the way that I'm achieving that is, remember, dry, so wet sticks to dry, and then dry sticks to wet. So by putting a wet squash that has the buttermilk dredge in it into my dry flour, it will stick to it very nicely. And you can see how nicely that looks. And I'm keeping one hand clean just in case needed. That's also another sort of secret here about frying. Now, this is very, very hot, so I'm gonna turn my pan down and I'm going to go ahead and drop these in there. And these are not really gonna take that much time at all. It's gonna take very few, I'd say probably just a couple of moments. You always want to drain something after you fried it. But that's gonna be, again, you want it to be nice and crispy. You don't want it to be oily. So I have my paper towel with, and I take, these only took a couple seconds, and I can see already how nice and brown they're getting. Looking absolutely fantastic. So I can already go ahead and with my slotted spoon, I'm gonna take these off and just put these on my paper towel. And I'm gonna wanna do them as a layer, like this. And I'm gonna wanna go ahead and I'm going to immediately just season these a little bit with a little bit of that seasoning salt, just each side, because the best time to season it is when they have a little bit of that oil on it, because then that's going to adhere the salt really nicely. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish up this next batch. Okay, so our squash is almost completely done. I see it has this fantastic sort of golden brown color. And I'm gonna go ahead and take this out of there because it's really nice and golden brown. Turn off my cooktop here. And you know, it's really difficult for me to give you a time as to how long these should be in here. Just a couple minutes, but it's really something that you'll just tell from a visual. You'll be able to tell and you'll be able to look and see that these are nice and golden brown, and that's what you want. So as soon as I have this, I'm gonna take my thermometer out of here. I'm gonna put it on my paper towel here, and I'm gonna go ahead and just cover that so I don't kind of stink up my house. So I'm gonna go ahead and salt these really quickly with a little seasoning salt. If you don't like seasoning salt, you can just go ahead and just use regular salt on that. But definitely try the seasoning salt in the batter. Once these are done, these go on the base of my dish. So I'm gonna do about maybe, I have 4 of these per plate. Kind of get some of the newer ones and then some of the other ones. I have this arugula that I'm going to just put on like that. Just kind of want to mound it a little bit. Arugula is very good to use on a dish like this because it sort of acts as almost like a insulation barrier between the cold dressing and the cheese you're going to put on top and the hot squash. I'll put a little Parmesan cheese on this, like so. This is sometimes where instead of using if you want to drizzle something, instead of using a spoon, you can kind of take a fork and you get to do a much better job of drizzling a dressing onto your salad. And then that way you can use actually less dressing if you have drizzle because it's all around. So I'm going to drizzle that around like that. One of my favorite things always, balsamic glaze, which is going to add a sour note, it's going to add sweetness, and it's really going to brighten this dish. You know, you've got the fried squash, which can be a little heavy, you've got the bitterness, you've got the umami from that Parmesan cheese. This is just going to take that dish to the next level and give it a little sweetness, give it a little acidity, and a brightness. Color as well, I mean, look how beautiful that looks. So here you have the fried squash salad. And you're just gonna wanna, when you come in here and eat this, you're just gonna wanna grab a little bit of that squash with a little bit of all the ingredients. And that squash is so crispy still. I'll tell you, the dressing, the smokiness of the dressing, the sweetness of that balsamic vinegar. And this is sort of a classic Southern dish, sort of akin to like fried green tomatoes. I encourage y'all to try frying vegetables, use my buttermilk flour method, make sure your temperature of your oil is correct, and just have fun. Thanks, this is Brian Payton Joyner. Have a great day. So I've let my oil cool for a good bit, so you can see it's been sitting here for many hours. And what happens is any residual batter, flour, whatever, sort of drop to the bottom. So I can still use this oil on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drain the oil off the top and I'm going to leave that sort of sludge on the bottom. And then I'm going to be able to reuse this oil. And oil can be pretty expensive, so it's definitely a trick that I encourage all of you. You can use it several times, let's say 4 or 5 times. And as long as you get rid of some of these dregs, then it'll be fine at room temperature and you don't have any issue with spoilage.